If your sister's not invited, we're not coming either. That was the cold statement from my parents right before my wedding day, a sentence sharp enough to shatter anyone's joy. To me, it was not just a threat to miss an important ceremony, but a knife twisting into a scar that had marked me for 20 long years. All my life, my parents shielded my sister, excusing every cruel thing she did, while I became the target for her bullying. Even when I was in pain or humiliated, all I ever heard was, "She's just joking." Standing at the threshold of marriage, I should have been thinking only about the happiness ahead of me, but those words dragged me back to every moment I was dismissed. And I wondered, have you ever been forced to choose between peace for yourself and the toxic expectations of your family? And as you listen to this story, tell me where you're watching from, because I truly want to know how far my story will travel across the world. Hi, my name is Emily Carter. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, in a family of 3 siblings. My older sister, Vanessa, is 2 years older than me and was seen by my parents as the star, simply because of her striking looks and outgoing personality. My younger brother, Michael, 3 years younger than me, was the only one in the family who often witnessed and understood what I had to endure. And then there was me, the middle child, always overlooked, existing like a shadow in the very home that was supposed to protect me. I remember so clearly how my childhood felt like a stage where only one person was ever allowed to shine, Vanessa, while I was nothing more than the blurry backdrop. Every birthday that should have been a joyful day filled with love and attention turned into an opportunity for her to showcase her cruel brand of humor. When I was 7, as everyone sang and I leaned forward to blow out the candles, Vanessa deliberately let the cake slip to the floor. Frosting and crumbs scattered everywhere. My friends burst into laughter, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that felt good. I stood frozen, my face burning with shame, while my parents only waved it off. "She's just playing around, don't make such a big deal." Another year, when I was 11, she secretly took my diary, the little book where I wrote innocent thoughts about friends and teachers, and read it out loud in front of the guests in our living room. I burst into tears, yet once again the same refrain came. "Your sister's just having fun, don't be so sensitive." Vanessa was always indulged in ways that left me torn between jealousy and loneliness. She was signed up for jazz dance, piano lessons, and even acting classes. My parents proudly bragged about her performances and the new dress they bought for her school gala. As for me, I had loved painting since I was little, but I had to make do with borrowing old textbooks from the library or scraps of paper from my father's office. I never even dared to dream of attending a real art class, because every time I brought it up, the answer was the same. "That's just a hobby. It won't give you a future." Yet whenever Vanessa mentioned wanting to learn something new, my parents immediately found a way to make it happen. In their eyes, she was an investment, while I was nothing more than the bare minimum responsibility. My younger brother, Michael, was too little back then to fully understand the injustice. He would just sit and watch as Vanessa and I argued, never daring to step in. But as he grew older, he began to notice the blatant favoritism. Once, he whispered to me, "You're not wrong. I see it, Mom and Dad always side with Vanessa." Those words felt like a gentle touch on an old wound, a quiet confirmation that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. The unfairness in our family was real. I still remember one memory that cuts as deeply today as it did back then. When I was 10, my school held an art contest with the theme The Dream House. I had spent the entire week working on it. Using every little crayon, I had to finish a picture of a house with a garden full of flowers and a room flooded with sunlight. To my surprise, I won first place, and the principal handed me the award in front of the whole school during assembly. For a child who had always been hidden in her sister's shadow, that moment felt like the first ray of sunlight breaking into my life. I ran home excitedly, clutching the certificate, desperate for my parents' praise. But the moment I opened the door, I heard my father's booming voice. "Vanessa was chosen as a cheerleader for the school team. She'll get to wear the uniform and cheer at the games." The whole family erupted in cheers. my mother already fussing over buying shoes and tailoring the uniform. I stood in the corner of the room holding my certificate, invisible. When I shyly held it out, my mother gave it a quick glance and nodded. "That's nice, just put it on the table." And that was it. No hug, no praise, no photo to capture the moment. That night, I folded the certificate and tucked it into a drawer, listening as my parents and Vanessa chattered excitedly in the living room about her upcoming performance. I cried quietly, realizing for the first time with painful clarity that my achievements would never matter in this family. Every spotlight belonged to her, and I was nothing more than a faded silhouette in the background. Vanessa's shadow stretched across my childhood, swallowing even the smallest sparks of joy I tried to hold on to. That imbalance didn't just hurt me, it planted a lasting obsession deep inside me, the belief that I would never be good enough, that no matter how hard I tried, I would never earn recognition. In those years, every time I blew out my birthday candles, I wished for only one thing: that someday I would escape this house. Escape the role of punching bag my parents had so carelessly or perhaps intentionally assigned to me. When I entered high school, the gap between Vanessa and me only grew wider, as if an invisible line split our worlds in two. Vanessa became popular from the very first year, not only for her striking looks but also because she was dating one of the school's most admired basketball players. Everywhere she went, friends surrounded her, laughter followed, compliments flowed, and admiring eyes lit up in her direction. At every game, she wore her cheerleading uniform, held up signs, and the crowd roared her name. My parents were even more proud, boasting to anyone who would listen that their golden daughter was the pride of the family. They covered the living room walls with Vanessa's photos, shots of her in her cheer uniform, posing with the basketball team, smiling at the autumn dance. Whenever guests came over, my father would point to those pictures and retell the same stories, as if Vanessa was the only proof that our family had ever achieved anything at all. Meanwhile, I chose a completely different path. I didn't have striking looks, nor did I enjoy noise and crowds. Instead, I joined the debate team, spending hours after school poring over research, practicing how to present arguments, and finding joy in intellectual sparring. I was a strong student, consistently ranking among the top of my class, and even receiving recognition from teachers during school assemblies. But every time I brought a certificate home, my parents would sigh as if I were bragging about something useless. "Don't be jealous of your sister," my mother would say, while my father added, "Everyone knows Vanessa is the one who brings happiness to this family." My awards were stuffed into drawers, while the small tokens of my achievements were never framed or displayed on the wall. By then, Michael was growing older and starting to see the favoritism for what it really was. He often sat beside me at dinner, silent as our parents scolded me yet again for not being happy about your sister's success. Later, in the privacy of my room, he would whisper, "You did great. Don't believe what they say." His words of comfort were one of the few sources of encouragement I had, but because of that bond, both of us were labeled as selfish. Our parents insisted we didn't appreciate family, that we were only envious of Vanessa. Those words, repeated over and over, gradually built a cold wall that separated me from them. There was one incident I still remember like a nightmare, a turning point that made me realize I would never be protected in this family. I had a small, close-knit group of 3 friends who, like me, loved reading and art. We would sit together at lunch, share comics, and talk about movies. There was a boy in the group named Aaron whom I secretly liked. Somehow, Vanessa found out, and instead of staying quiet, she invented a story that I had confessed my feelings to him and been flatly rejected. The rumor spread down the halls in a single day, so that when I walked into class, I heard suppressed giggles behind me and saw pitying or mocking looks turned my way. Aaron avoided me, and the little friend group gradually dissolved because no one could stand the awkward atmosphere. I remember the day I confronted Vanessa, my voice trembling as I asked, "Why did you do that?" She just shrugged and gave a contemptuous smile. "Oh, you're too sensitive. Who cares? It was just a joke." I went to our parents hoping this time they would understand. But my mother repeated the same line, Your sister was only joking, don't make a fuss. My father wore a stern face and said, don't be selfish, the family has enough stress already. I was stunned, realizing that justice did not exist in that house. Nobody cared how hurt I was, nobody wanted to know the truth. They only cared that the image of star Vanessa stayed bright, and it didn't matter if I became the punchline. Since then, I began to close myself off. I became afraid to make friends, reluctant to share, worried that anything I said could be turned into a weapon by my sister. I spent more time in the library, in the school art room, or sitting alone writing short stories. I found comfort in books, in characters who fought back and escaped being abandoned. Every night, I lay in my small room listening to Vanessa laugh with her friends in the living room, and I dreamed of the day I could get out of this house and live a life where no one looked down on me. High school taught me a bitter lesson. Sometimes family is not a place of shelter but a place that makes you small, that makes you doubt your own worth. Yet, within that darkness, a slow-burning flame was kindled inside me, the desire to leave and to redefine my life. And I knew that one day I would step out of Vanessa's shadow and never return to stand in the background for anyone again. The first turning point of adulthood came when we were both preparing to step into college. Vanessa, with all the praise and expectations showered on her by our parents, didn't score high enough to get into any decent university. Her academics had always been shallow, and the nights of partying along with afternoons spent on cheerleading left gaping holes in her record. When the official results came back, she was rejected everywhere. I remember that evening so vividly, the whole family sitting around the dinner table, the air heavy and suffocating. I thought my parents would be firm, that they would finally tell her to change her ways. But no. My father sighed and patted her shoulder. She just needs more time to find the right path. My mother nodded. College isn't everything. Vanessa will shine in her own way. Those words hit me like a punch in the gut, as if all the nights I had spent studying, never daring to skip a class, meant nothing. In stark contrast, my results were brilliant. I received an acceptance letter from Ohio State University, one of the rare moments in my life when I truly felt capable, worthy. I can still remember my hands trembling as I held the letter, my heart pounding with joy. For once, I hoped my parents would be proud of me. But when I brought the news home, instead of celebrating, they reacted in a way I could never have imagined. My mother frowned and said that going to school far away would make Vanessa feel abandoned. My father declared firmly, "You'll choose a school close to home. We don't want your sister feeling left behind." In that moment, all the excitement inside me vanished, snuffed out like a candle in a fierce wind. I protested, raising my voice at them for the first time. This is my dream. I've worked for years to earn this opportunity. Why should I have to sacrifice for her? But their response was anger. My father roared, "You're always defiant. You're always trying to divide the family. Why can't you think of others?" I froze, tears streaming down my face but unable to cry out. My mother sat there with a look of reproach, as if I were the one at fault. Vanessa, instead of showing shame, crossed her arms and smiled faintly, as if watching a play where she was the star and I was merely a troublemaker. Michael sat in the corner, silent for a long moment, then let out a bitter line. "One day I'll leave and go far away. I don't want to live in a house that turns white into black like this." My parents snapped at him to shut up, but I saw deep empathy in his eyes. At least I knew I wasn't completely alone. In the days that followed, I wrestled with the conflict inside me. On one side was the longing to live my own life. On the other was the burden of toxic family expectations. I realized that no matter how talented I was or what I achieved, my efforts would always be minimized, denied, or worse, used as proof that I was jealous. Meanwhile, every mistake Vanessa made, no matter how serious, had a reason to be forgiven and covered up. The scales in my family had never been balanced, and now I was certain they never would be. That night, I sat in my room staring at the Ohio State University acceptance letter on my desk. Those printed lines, which should have brought joy, only stirred a bitter feeling. I had done everything a child could do. Study hard, be diligent, avoid causing trouble. Yet, it turned out that it was never enough. The recognition from my parents, the thing I wanted most, had never come, and perhaps never would. I lay back on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, and for the first time in my life, I whispered a promise to myself. One day I will leave this house, break free from this cycle of unfairness. I will define my own worth without needing any of them to confirm it. And when that day comes, nothing will stop me. The day I finally set foot on Ohio State University's campus, it felt like stepping out of a dark room and breathing fresh air for the first time. No more nagging, no more comparing looks, no more of Vanessa's shadow falling over every moment. I brought only a few old boxes, some drawings, and a handful of books, but inside I held what felt like an entirely new beginning. The dorm room was small, but it was the first private space in my life I could lock, hang the paintings I loved, play the music I wanted, and keep anyone from barging in to ruin it. In the beginning, I worried that I would feel lost, that no one would notice a shy girl so used to being pushed aside, but I was wrong. The professors here truly cared about their students. They listened and encouraged me to speak up. When I raised my hand in a literature discussion, no one laughed or mocked me. Instead, I received nods of recognition. That feeling was like discovering a pair of wings that had been broken for far too long. I quickly found a part-time job at the university library. The work wasn't glamorous shelving books, helping students check materials in and out, sometimes staffing the computer desk. But I loved the quiet rows of shelves, the smell of old paper, and the soft whispers of turning pages. In that space, I felt useful, trusted, and responsible. The manager, Mrs. Cooper, once told me, "You have a sharp eye. Everything you organize is in perfect order. Keep this up, and wherever you work in the future, people will value you." A simple compliment, yet it carried more weight than anything my parents had ever said to me. Outside of classes and work, I joined the writing club. At first, I only intended to sit quietly and listen, but after a few sessions, I gathered the courage to read one of my short stories, a tale about a girl swallowed by her sister's shadow but still struggling to find her own light. When I finished reading, the room fell silent for a few seconds, and then came a wave of applause. A boy named Chris said, "That story reminds me of myself. The way you write is so vivid." I was stunned, because for the first time my painful experiences were seen as something of value. While I was slowly finding my place, Vanessa's life was going in the opposite direction. After failing to get into university, she enrolled in a few community college courses around Cleveland but dropped out of each one before finishing. Sometimes she complained the classes were boring, other times that the professors were too strict, or that the schedule didn't suit her. Yet my parents defended her endlessly. They told the neighbors that Vanessa was finding her path, that she just needs more time. Once, when I came home for a visit, I overheard my mother bragging to my aunt. "Vanessa isn't ordinary, she's carefully weighing her future options." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat and turned into a heavy sigh of resignation. In the first few breaks, I still forced myself to go home, carrying a fragile hope that my parents would be different, that they would be proud to see me growing into an independent adult. But everything was exactly the same. At every meal, the conversation revolved only around Vanessa, what job she might try next, what plans she had with friends tomorrow. When I mentioned my library job, my mother only gave a half-hearted nod. "That's fine, as long as you don't neglect your studies." When I spoke about my short story being published in the student magazine, my father dismissed it with, "Not as practical as getting a real job." Meanwhile, all Vanessa had to do was say she wanted to take a makeup class or join a new dance group, and their eyes lit up as if she had just announced plans for a multi-million-dollar company. By then, Michael was in high school, and his dissatisfaction was becoming clearer. During one of my visits, he whispered, "You were right to study far away. It's suffocating here." He promised that once he was old enough, he too would leave, refusing to be tied down like Vanessa. Hearing him say that broke my heart, because both of us had to dream of escaping the very place that should have been our safest home, our family. Gradually, I chose not to go back at all. During holidays, I stayed in the dorms, joined friends, or took extra shifts at the library just to avoid sitting in that house soaked in favoritism. I knew my parents complained that I was distant, but I didn't care anymore. In truth, being far away made me feel calmer. Sometimes distance from toxicity is the closest you can be to yourself. College was not just an academic path, it was a journey to rediscover my worth. Every essay that earned praise, every story that drew applause, every paycheck I received from the library, all those small things pieced together like shards of a mirror, showing me that I truly existed, that I truly mattered, and that I was not just someone else's shadow. I began to believe that maybe, one day, I would break free completely from the painful cycle my family had created. And from that moment, the roots of a new life began to take hold inside me. I met David Miller in my sophomore year at a technology seminar I only attended because a friend from the writing club dragged me along. David had already graduated and was working as a software engineer in Pittsburgh, but he often came back to campus for career events to support students. My first impression of him wasn't his appearance, it was the way he listened. In a room buzzing with noise, David paid close attention to every question, every comment, and when he responded, he never rushed or boasted. His calmness felt like cool water flowing through a mind long used to the heat of ridicule from my sister. We began talking, then dating, and within a few months, I realized I was experiencing something I never had before. A relationship where I was valued, not a blurred shadow of anyone else. David was kind in a quiet way. He remembered every little detail I told him, from the kind of coffee I liked to the book I hadn't finished reading. He never interrupted me when I spoke, never belittled the small successes I hesitated to share. When I told him about my short story being published in the student magazine, he didn't just congratulate me, he printed a copy, framed it, and hung it in his office. It was the first time I had ever seen my work honored as something to be proud of. Our relationship progressed naturally, until that Thanksgiving when David suggested coming with me to Cleveland to meet my family. I hesitated. All the memories of Vanessa and my parents flooded back like dark clouds. But I didn't want to hide that part of my life from David, nor did I want him to think I was ashamed of my family. So I agreed. When we arrived, the atmosphere in the house was unchanged. Vanessa was already standing in the living room, her face lit with the kind of eagerness that hinted at mischief. When I introduced David, he shook hands politely and smiled warmly. My parents smiled too, but I noticed how their eyes lit up when they looked at him, so different from the indifference they usually showed me. For a moment, I thought maybe things would be fine. But I was wrong. At dinner, while everyone was talking about work, Vanessa suddenly gave a mocking laugh and said loudly, "Emily has a boyfriend? That's surprising. Remember back in high school when I spread the rumor that Aaron rejected you and you cried your eyes out? Who would have thought you'd show up now with a handsome engineer?" The table went silent. My face flushed, my heart pounded, and it felt like my childhood shame had been dragged into the open in front of the man I loved. I waited for my parents to step in, to at least tell Vanessa to stop. But my father only gave an awkward chuckle, and my mother muttered the familiar line, "Don't be so sensitive, Emily, she's just joking." I went numb. After all these years, the refrain had never changed. I kept my eyes down on my plate, swallowing humiliation with each bite. But David didn't stay silent. He turned to Vanessa, his voice calm but firm. "I don't find that funny. In fact, I think it's a little disrespectful to turn someone's past into a joke." Vanessa glared, ready to argue, but David simply turned back, took my hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, and continued eating as if nothing had happened. Without raising his voice, he still made me feel protected. Later, as we walked outside through the neighborhood, I was both embarrassed and anxious. I asked, "Are you disappointed? I warned you, but I was afraid you'd feel ashamed of me." David stopped, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "Emily, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You don't deserve to endure that. The way they treat you says nothing about your worth. I see you as someone who deserves respect, and you need to believe that too." His words, simple yet powerful, felt like a seed planted deep within me. For so many years, I had convinced myself that I had to endure, to stay quiet just to keep the peace. But David showed me another possibility. I could refuse, I could choose not to be trampled. I could build a life where no one had the right to extinguish my light again. That night, lying in my old room, I listened to Vanessa's laughter drifting up from downstairs. But this time, instead of feeling small, I began to imagine a different future, a future where I wouldn't sit in this house waiting for my parents' approval. I would follow my own path, with someone who saw me as enough, like David. And that thought gave me a peace I had never known. 5 years together passed faster than I could have imagined. We graduated, weathered the ups and downs of early adulthood, and learned to listen and heal the wounds my childhood had left behind. One late autumn afternoon, as golden leaves blanketed the park in Pittsburgh, David suddenly knelt beside the wooden bench where we always Saturday. He opened a small box. Inside was a ring sparkling but not ostentatious. I choked up as he spoke. "Emily, I want to build a real family with you. A family where no one is left behind, no one is belittled." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, overwhelmed with happiness. The wedding planning began soon after. David and I dislike extravagance, so we chose a small ceremony by the shore of Lake Erie, where the wind carries the salty scent of the water and the sunset paints the lake in gold. We wanted an intimate service with close family, dear friends, and people who genuinely wished us happiness. But from the moment I started writing the guest list, I knew I would have to face a familiar storm, the name, Vanessa Carter. I thought about it a lot, but every time I imagined Vanessa smirking, mocking, or trying to ruin our special day, my chest tightened. I did not want the happiest day of my life overshadowed by the long-running pranks that had haunted my childhood. In the end, I made a firm decision. I would not invite my sister. When I told my parents, I thought at least they would listen to my reasons. They did not. The moment I spoke, my mother slammed her hand on the table. "Emily, are you out of your mind? This is family. How can you exclude your sister from such an important day?" My father's voice hardened. "If you don't invite Vanessa, then we will not attend either. Family must be complete. No one gets left behind." I stood there shaking, trying to explain. "For years she has hurt me. I cannot bear the thought of her turning the wedding into her stage." But my parents would not hear it. In their eyes, I was the one causing division, the selfish child daring to oppose the wall of injustice they had built for 20 years. That night, I could barely sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a fierce inner struggle. On one side was my own happiness, on the other was the blood family I had tried so hard to hold on to. I wondered, if they truly loved me, couldn't they at least respect my decision for once in my life? I cried when I realized the answer: never, and will never. My brother Michael was the first to learn of my decision. When I called him, my voice trembling, I said, "Do you think Mom and Dad will disown me if they can't bring Vanessa?" Michael was silent for a few seconds, then replied firmly, "You're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone ruin your big day. I will stand with you, whether Mom and Dad come or not." His words were like a pillar holding me up from collapsing. Michael had seen everything: my humiliations, my silent tears. Now he chose to stand by me, and that mattered more than any other form of recognition. In the weeks that followed, family tension escalated. My parents kept calling, sending texts, even writing long emails accusing me of betraying my own blood. Every time the phone rang, my chest tightened. I tried to avoid it, but the feeling of guilt gnawed at me. Seeing how exhausted I was, David held my hand and said, "You're not wrong, you're just protecting your happiness. A real family doesn't make you choose between them and your peace." I leaned against his shoulder, silently knowing my story was about to enter a new chapter, a chapter where I would have to draw the final boundary. That conflict showed me a harsh truth: even blood ties can be more toxic than anything else. And for the first time in my life, I began to believe that true happiness comes from choosing people who are worthy, not just those who happen to share your DNA. I knew sooner or later I would have to return to that old house and face my parents directly. The constant calls, the relentless messages, the never-ending refrain of "family is everything" wore me down. So on a Saturday afternoon, I drove more than 2 hours from Pittsburgh back to Cleveland, my heart tangled with emotions. Before stepping inside, I took a deep breath, as if bracing myself for battle. That dinner began in stiff silence. On the table sat roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the familiar dishes of my childhood, but now they only weighed heavy on me. My father sat at the head, his eyes sharp and cold, while my mother sighed from time to time as though she might burst into tears at any moment. And of course, Vanessa was there. She sat back comfortably, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at her lips, clearly satisfied that once again everything revolved around her. The moment the meal began, my father hurled the accusations straight at me. "Emily, do you really want to destroy this family? A wedding is a reunion, you cannot leave Vanessa out. Family is everything." I set down my fork, lifted my head, and met his eyes. My voice trembled slightly, but every word was steady. "What family, father? For 20 years, everything in this house has revolved around Vanessa. If that is your definition of family, then I have never belonged to it." The air around the table froze instantly. My mother clutched her chest, her eyes red and watery, whispering, "How could you say something so cruel?" My father's face turned crimson as he barked, "Enough. All you ever do is complain, always pointing out others' faults instead of looking at yourself." I turned to Vanessa and caught her triumphant smile. That smile dragged back every memory: the bucket of cold water dumped on my birthday, my private diary read aloud before friends, the times I struggled to rise only to be dragged down by one of her vicious jokes. Vanessa knew she had won many times before, and now she was certain she would win again. I took a deep breath and spoke, this time my voice no longer trembling. "You've protected her since the day I was little. No matter what she did, no matter how destructive, it was always excused as just a joke. But when I succeeded, when I achieved something, it was dismissed as jealousy or selfishness. Have you ever once asked yourselves what it was like for me to live in this house?" I looked straight at my parents, and for the first time, I didn't avoid their gaze. My father slammed his fist on the table, the sound rattling the dishes. "You're speaking with such ingratitude. We raised you, we fed you, we paid for your schooling, and now you stand here insulting us?" I let out a laugh, but it was a bitter one. Feeding a body isn't the same as nurturing a soul. For years, I've lived here as a shadow, mocked by my sister while no one ever stepped in to defend me. If that's what you call family, then it's a family with only one star, and everyone else forced to be nothing but the backdrop. My mother burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably, but not out of understanding me, only because she felt insulted. She covered her face and choked, "Emily, how can you be so cruel to your sister? She has her own struggles, you should be more understanding." Vanessa tilted her head, watching me as if she were enjoying a play. At that moment, I knew I had to stand up. I laid my napkin on the table, pushed back my chair, and declared firmly, "If she is everything, then stay with her. I don't need another round of this. This is my life, and I won't let it be destroyed anymore." My voice rang out strong, silencing the entire room. I turned and walked away from the table, behind me my father's angry shout, my mother's sobs, and Vanessa's mocking laugh. But strangely, I didn't feel weighed down anymore. Instead, I felt an odd lightness, as if I had just set down a burden I'd carried for 20 years. As I closed the door behind me, I knew with certainty that a new era had begun, one where I would no longer stay silent just to make others comfortable. My wedding took place on a cool summer morning, with a gentle breeze drifting in from Lake Erie across rows of white chairs neatly arranged in 2 lines. On the grassy aisle, clusters of pale blue hydrangeas and white roses formed an arch before the altar. As I stepped into the bridal tent, I felt a flicker of emptiness. The seats where my parents should have been remained vacant. But right beside me, my grandfather placed his trembling yet steady hand over mine and whispered, "You are not walking alone, Emily. I will take your father's place and walk you down the aisle." My eyes filled with tears, for it was the first time I truly felt like a daughter worthy of honor. Music swelled, and the guests rose to their feet, all turning toward the end of the aisle. I took my grandfather's arm and walked slowly forward. The sunlight shimmered on the lake, making my white dress billow like clouds. Michael stood ahead in a crisp suit, shoulders straight, a proud smile on his face. He gave a small wave, his eyes saying, "You did the right thing." And at the end of the aisle stood David, waiting, his face glowing brighter than I had ever seen it. The way he looked at me soothed every old wound in my heart. The ceremony unfolded in an atmosphere simple yet full of joy. Our closest friends and family gathered, laughing and sharing warm congratulations. I heard the waves lapping the shore mingled with the playful laughter of children running across the grass, and in that moment, I felt as though I had stepped into an entirely different world, a world with no comparisons, no shadows of favoritism. But that peace did not last long. Just as the priest began to speak, preparing to move into the ring exchange, the sound of a car engine rumbled from a distance. A red sedan pulled up at the gate, and out stepped Vanessa, sunglasses covering her face, lips painted bright red, followed by two friends dressed provocatively, smirking at one another. My heart clenched, the familiar sting of fear rushing back. I could see the intent in her eyes. This was her chance to turn my most important day into the stage for one of her cruel jokes. Vanessa strode forward, her high heels striking hard against the ground as she moved to cross the barrier where the guests were seated. But Michael was there first, stepping in to block her path. Behind him, two of David's closest friends joined, one of them a police officer, dressed in a suit but standing with authority, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Michael spoke firmly. "You are not allowed to enter. This is not the place for you to cause trouble." "What?" Vanessa burst out laughing, her voice sharp with disdain. "How ridiculous! I'm the bride's sister, and you dare stop me." The officer's expression didn't change as he replied, "Anyone not on the guest list will not be admitted. You may return to your car willingly, or we will be forced to intervene." The tension spread quickly. Some guests began whispering, a few glanced at me with worried eyes. I gripped David's hand tightly, my breath uneven, but he calmly placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't worry, no one is going to ruin our day." Vanessa looked around, hoping to find support. But instead of the usual nods from our parents, this time no one stood with her. My mother and father had chosen to stay home in protest of me, and now Vanessa was completely alone. Her face shifted from arrogance to anger, and finally she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine, let's see how long your happiness lasts." With that, she turned sharply, her heels striking the ground in cold, hard clacks, as she climbed back into her car and sped off in a cloud of dust. Her two friends scrambled after her. In that moment, I exhaled in relief. Michael turned back, took my hand, and his eyes shone with pride. "I promised I'd stand by you, and today I did." Tears welled up as I smiled, thanking him for always being my anchor when the rest of the world turned away. The ceremony continued, this time without a single interruption. The priest read the vows, David slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands trembling slightly but his eyes steady. Applause erupted as we shared our first kiss as husband and wife. My grandfather wiped away tears, Michael clapped with all his strength, and our friends cheered so loudly that the lakeside seemed to glow with the music of happiness. When the reception began, I looked around and saw genuine smiles, no pretense, no shadows cast by anyone else. I saw Michael laughing with friends, my grandfather being gently led onto the dance floor by younger relatives, and David never letting go of my hand as though afraid of losing me. And I realized then that I had been right to choose carefully who would stand beside us on this day. As night fell and the golden lights shimmered on the surface of the lake, I stood with David gazing into the distance. He whispered, "See, Emily, this is what real family looks like. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who choose to love and respect you." I rested my head on his shoulder, letting tears fall, but this time they were tears of joy. That day, my parents weren't there. But I no longer felt empty. Because I had finally overcome my deepest fears, the fear of being dismissed, overshadowed, unrecognized. And when I said, "I do," by the windswept shore of the lake, I knew I had officially left the past behind and begun a new journey filled with light. After the wedding, I thought everything would finally settle down, but it didn't. Just 2 days later, my phone lit up again and again with long messages from my mother. The very first line left me frozen. "You have shamed this family. You owe us an apology." Not just one, but dozens of messages followed, all repeating the same accusations. That I was unfilial, that I had made my parents the subject of neighborhood gossip, that I had humiliated them by daring to exclude Vanessa. I read them all, but I didn't reply. For perhaps the first time in my life, I chose silence as a way to protect myself. Michael received his share of blame as well. He told me during a brief call, "Mom called me a traitor for standing with you. Dad said I'm no longer his son." His voice was heavy, but not trembling. "I'm used to it now. At least I know I did the right thing." After that call, Michael blocked their numbers and cut off contact completely. I knew that decision couldn't have been easy, but for both of us, it was the only way to preserve what little peace we had. Meanwhile, as my brother and I built a new circle of safety, Vanessa's life kept spiraling downward. She quit one job after another, cashier at a supermarket for less than a month, a spa employee until she complained of exhaustion, a stint in a pyramid scheme selling cosmetics that left her in debt to friends. Each time she failed, she wept and blamed an unfair society, jealous coworkers, or harsh bosses. And my parents, as always, rushed to shield her. "She just needs more time. She just needs more support." That was the mantra they repeated to justify everything. I heard these updates through relatives, but I felt nothing anymore. Only a weary recognition that the cycle had never changed and probably never would. Meanwhile, David and I began a new chapter. We bought a small house in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, with a backyard just big enough for a few flower beds and a wooden table set. In the mornings, David usually made coffee while I sat by the window writing or reading. These simple things were what I had never known in my childhood home: peace without conditions, where no one had to compete, where no one had to sacrifice just so another could be cherished. I remember the first time Michael came to visit. He looked around my little kitchen and laughed. "There are only a few things here, but it feels warmer than the whole big house in Cleveland." We shared dinner, talked about work, and for the first time, I saw my brother's smile free of sadness. Perhaps both of us were learning how to redefine family. Then one day, the phone rang. It was my father. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. His voice was hoarse and weary. "Emily, our family is in trouble. I had to take a few months off work for my health. Bills are piling up. Vanessa still isn't stable. Can you help us?" I was silent. In my mind flashed 1,000 memories. The times he told me, "Don't be jealous of your sister." The times he scolded me as selfish just for wanting fairness. The times he slammed the table and called me ungrateful. I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "I won't carry it anymore. I hope you recover soon, but I will not continue enabling her bad choices." On the other end of the line, silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, I heard my father's heavy voice. "You've changed." I let out a small laugh, not a mocking one, but a laugh born of the realization that I had truly stepped out of the old cycle. "Yes, I have changed. And I have to be this way." I hung up, my hands no longer trembling as before, only a relief like someone who has set down a long-carried burden. In the months that followed, I received a few more messages from my mother, all the same familiar reproaches. That I had abandoned the family, that I was the reason they were falling apart. I did not reply. My phone grew quieter than it had ever been, and I recognized that quiet as a form of peace. My parents still had Vanessa to care for, to hope for, to deceive themselves with. As for me, I had finally chosen a different path. Life with David settled into a steady rhythm. I kept writing, entered a few small contests, and won some awards. He advanced in his career. We traveled, built simple rituals together. Evening walks, weekend cooking, inviting friends over for barbecues. Those joys my parents would never know, because they chose to view me through the lens of the betraying child. But I no longer felt pain. What steadied me most was seeing Michael find his own path. He received a scholarship to a university out of state, and on his very first day of classes, he called me, his voice brimming with confidence. "Sis, I've finally gotten out." I smiled through tears, knowing that even if, in our parents' eyes, they had lost 2 children, the truth was that we had finally found ourselves. And in quiet moments, sitting in our little house in Pittsburgh, I often thought about my father's old saying, "Family is everything." Perhaps he was right, only he never understood what family truly meant. Family is not the place where I must sacrifice myself to feed a manufactured star. Family is the place where I am loved, respected, and allowed to be myself. My life now is not perfect, but it is real. I have David, the man who always holds my hand when storms roll in. I have Michael, my brother, who never abandoned me, even though he too had been hurt. I have a small house with a rose garden, the laughter of friends at weekend barbecues, quiet mornings making coffee, and evenings reading by the window. That is the family I chose, a family built on love, respect, and peace. And I know the long journey filled with tears has finally led me here to a place without the shadows of comparison, without my sister's mocking laughter, without my parents' reproachful stares. What remains is me, alongside the people who truly love me, and a wide-open future ahead. I have chosen my new family, one of love, respect, and peace. And for the first time in my life, I feel truly free. If you are watching this story and feel a familiar ache in your chest from old memories, know that you are not alone. Many of us were born into families that were far from whole, places that should have been filled with love but instead were full of favoritism, comparison, or even neglect. Those wounds can make you doubt your own worth. But, believe me, you do not need anyone to define who you are. What matters is not forcing them to change, but daring to change how you see yourself. You have the right to choose who stays in your life, and you have the right to let go of those who only bring you pain. Family is not only blood, true. Family is where you are respected, loved, and free to be yourself. So if today you carry pain inflicted by the people closest to you, remember that you can still rewrite your story. And sometimes the greatest victory is the quiet moment when you say, "I deserve peace."